real life. Touch grass, go outside, living real life. Bitch, I'm real life, ride, living real life. Motherfucking zone!
Real quick before I get into the video, if you guys enjoyed that intro track, there is a full version created by a good supporter of mine, Dr. Quinn. I will link all the places you can find him down below in the description, and he actually made that entire song based around my channel, complete with random references and from material that I've covered and reviews that I've done. So it's super creative. I'm flattered to be a part of it. Go check it out. Link will be down below in the description. Give him some love and tell him Ryan sent you. CASTLEVANIA originally began as a video game series taking heavy inspiration not just from the original Dracula novel, but also various incarnations of it, like the Universal films, the Christopher Lee Hammer films, and other gothic and dark fantasy material, combining it all into a classic side-scrolling experience that provided hours of entertainment and intrigue for anyone who grew up in the late 80s or early 90s that wanted to slay some vampires and end the curse of Dracula once and for all. Armed with your signature weapon, the Vampire Killer Whip, in the original game and its sequel, Simon's Quest, you take the role of Simon Belmont, a descendant of a long line of vampire hunters, and make your way through various towns, cemeteries, and Dracula's labyrinth of a castle. Also, you gotta understand that at the time these games were coming out, we didn't really have many horror video games to choose from. So going into the Castlevania world and traveling through the dark and atmospheric locations that it gave you, along with fighting some of the most hideous and demonic enemies at the time, well, it was just a badass experience, and I kinda missed the vibe and tones that these games gave me. I remember playing a lot of Simon's Quest back in the day when I was a kid, and I also distinctly remember being pretty horrible at it, as you can see from the footage here where I attempted to play some of it again. So, you know, maybe not the best at the game, but despite all that, I always had a lot of fun with it. The video game series of Castlevania has a long line of sequels and spin-offs that run through each generation of gaming console, some a lot better than others, but today we're not going to discuss any of the games per se, but the animated adaptation released on Netflix that aired from 2017 to 2021. Created by comic book writer Warren Ellis, this series exploded with popularity when it first dropped, and it's not hard to see why. Deciding to take the material as seriously as possible and specifically construct a dark fantasy that is meant for adults as its viewership, the Castlevania animated series went more mature with its themes and darkness and didn't shy away from the horror, violence, and gore. Right from the get-go, you understand that this animation is going to be for adults and people that aren't squeamish when it comes to the pure visceral carnage that vampires and other demonic entities would unleash upon humanity here, while at the same time deciding to not just go for carnage and shock value, but also deliver complex characters with conflicting ideals and struggles, even managing to humanize many of its monsters and make monsters out of some of its humans. On top of that, it also takes inspiration for its animation style, not just from the lore of the video games and the gothic style of the creatures and locations, but the choreography of many of its battles is very similar to the style of anime. In fact, even though it was produced in America, it is called an anime by many people just in a general sense, and it's not hard to see why. And let's be honest, if not for the inspiration of anime, Castlevania likely would be a very different kind of animated series, and also with the video games as well, since they originate in Japan. So it's not just the fights, but the ways the characters are designed, the way they interact, and that specific visual flair of the series that Castlevania, other than its country of origin, is basically an anime. And because of all of this, it has an interesting crossover of fans. You have fans of the original video games checking it out for its adaptation, you have horror and vampire fans checking it out for that premise, and then you also have anime fans that are here for the style and visuals that are coming into it. So Castlevania winds up being this really neat amalgamation of so many different things, and because of which it draws so many different kinds of fans together, and then that allows itself to do whatever it wants to with those inspirations. It's a really unique blend of so many different things, and that works to its benefit. So this video will contain some light spoilers, as I will be talking about each season and giving my thoughts on them, but I'm going to try to be as vague as I can with particular areas of the story in case you guys haven't seen it, but it's impossible to talk about some things without incorporating a little bit of spoilers. So other than that, let's get into it. So truthfully, even though the Castlevania series is adapting the video games, it really only takes from Castlevania 3 and a few tidbits from some other games. So the only unfortunate thing for me when I first watched Season 1 was that I was expecting to see Simon Belmont. Well, I don't. Instead, this series takes place many years before that because Castlevania 3 is actually a prequel to the first two games. Instead, its lead vampire hunter is Trevor Belmont, an ancestor of Simon and one of the leads of Castlevania 3, alongside Sypha and Alucard, who are both major characters of the series. So, Season 1, though I think it's great, has the drawback of only being 4 episodes, so it ends up feeling more like a prelude than anything else. And this is the detriment of making an adult animation on Netflix, and that's the budget. So the first 4 episodes is all they were able to make with what they had, but it does make the best out of those 4 episodes. The first episode really is the main lore and backstory dump, as we find out that Dracula falls in love with a human woman named Lisa and gives her all of this information on science and technology that he has discovered in his multiple lifetimes, particularly when it comes to medicine. So this just makes the extreme religious leaders of the world fearful of Lisa, and they burn her at the stake for witchcraft. Thus causes Dracula to fly into a rage and basically declare the entire human race as his enemy and plans to commit total genocide. Honestly, I don't really blame him. The entire first episode focuses on Dracula and the process of hope that he had that's destroyed, and what he plans to do to humanity because of it. Dracula is not depicted as just an evil monster, though he is a vampire, but instead as a tragic figure that had his one shining light in the world extinguished on him, and now everybody must endure the same pain. And the horror tone of the show is on full display as he unleashes a legion of demonic monsters onto the town, reminiscent of the sheer brutality featured in something like Berserk's Eclipse. The rest of Season 1 is spent building up its protagonist, Trevor Belmont, who had a lonely and depressing upbringing, and drinking himself into an early grave, decides that he has to come to terms with his lineage and embrace the Belmont monster hunting ways. Sypha is a powerful speaker, which is basically a magic user who has a lot of really cool spells and attacks that she does throughout the series. She joins Trevor on his travels, and then finally we get introduced to Alucard, who in this canon is Dracula's son, a half-human, half-vampire, which gives him the much needed powers to combat evil, but he also has the trauma of a pretty hectic upbringing. Side note, the Alucard in this series has nothing on Hellsing's Alucard, but that's a story for another time. Season 1 offers a lot of potential of what this animation could be. It gets our characters to group together and begins the lore and ideas that the future seasons would expand upon. But Season 2 is the real deal. This is as Castlevania as you can get, in my opinion, and the best season of the show. What you get with 8 episodes now is basically 2 ongoing storylines that eventually crash into one another at the end of the season. You have Trevor, Sypha, and Alucard traveling together, fighting monsters, and making their way to stop Dracula, and then you also have Dracula and his crew plotting the genocide of all humanity. But it gets way more complex than you think it would. For starters, I will say that there are a lot of fun moments where the protagonists are here together, and oftentimes their journey feels like some D&D missions and exposition lore dumps, which isn't a bad thing for a fantasy series. But the more interesting side of the story is with Dracula and his group, which is focused on a variety of moving pieces and actually becomes the forefront of the show in many ways. The villains tend to get way more screen time and have way more to do than the heroes do, which was a pleasant surprise for me the first time I was watching it. I'm a huge fan of Dracula as a character, from the Nosferatu days to Bela Lugosi to Gary Oldman and to Castlevania's Dracula. I think he's a top fictional character of all time, and an extremely versatile one as well. I even named my cat Dracula, and he's fucking adorable. Anyway, Dracula here seems like a man with nothing left to lose or to live for, and we see him enter some, no pun intended, really dark places psychologically. On the flip side, we have the politics at play within his castle as we are introduced to 2 humans, Hector and Isaac, that can create monsters for his army and have turned their back on their own race of humanity. There's also a vampire named Carmilla who believes that Dracula is just some old hack and wants to take over his power and resources. And all three of these characters have a lot of great story with them, and it's only built and expanded upon more as the series progresses. Everything builds up fantastically to reach its climax. Carmilla manipulates Hector into betraying Dracula. Dracula teleports Isaac to the desert in order to protect him, and then our trio arrive to face Dracula in combat with some brilliant animation and really high emotional stakes. When it comes down to just Dracula versus Alucard, there's this pain within both of them as they don't want to kill one another, but it's all led to this and there's no escaping this moment. The animation is beautiful and it also reflects their inner conflicts, and all of the things that are done with this final battle with Dracula are masterfully created. But spoilers here, since there's no way around this and I can't talk about seasons 3 and 4 without mentioning it, so gotta say it, Alucard does manage to stake Dracula and kill him. And this was really surprising. Considering Dracula is the big bad of the franchise, to see him killed off here was something I was not expecting. But also, it's Dracula. I mean, he always comes back from the dead, in the games, in the movies, in everything. So I expected him to return to the series at some point, and, well, kinda. Season 3 is an interesting entity. With Dracula defeated, even the loosely based game plot adaptation would now be over. So this is where the Netflix series has the freedom to do what it wants to, and that can be for the best or to its detriment depending on how you want to look at it. Instead of having an overarching antagonist this season, instead it focuses more on character building with multiple storylines that don't really end up converging at all. You have 4 stories that are ongoing basically. You have Trevor and Sypha uncovering a mystery of a satanic cult in a town. You have Alucard living in Dracula's castle alone but encountering 2 human vampire hunters. You have Isaac building up his demonic army in an attempt to continue the ideals that he had with Dracula, and then you also have Carmilla and her fellow vampire girls that plot their own takeover of humanity, and Hector, oh man, dear God, Hector, this man really needs to learn to stay away from vampire chicks. They cause him nothing but trouble and despair, and they introduce a very cute-looking ginger vampire girl that over the course of the season essentially turns Hector into her pet slave. Yeah, this man's seen better days. Though I'm sure some of you out there would probably be into it.
And I gave you what you always really needed. I made you into my pet.
Now, when you do a season with multiple storylines going on at the same time, the problem is going to be there's going to be some that you care about a lot more than others, and it also means that a lot of the characters don't get a chance to interact with one another. Each story taken on its own has some interesting things going on, but largely this season feels very detached because of it, and unlike season 1 and 2 that had a clear momentum and a climax to get to, this season feels way more disjointed. Killing off Dracula was an ambitious idea, but his presence is truly lacking here in Season 3, and it definitely feels like something is missing. But on the flip side, there is a lot of character development, particularly for Isaac, which becomes super important later on. Alucard's story, I also felt like had a lot of potential because he essentially spends a lot of time with these human characters who end up, well, first banging him, but then betraying him, and then he eventually has to kill them and then puts their bodies on stakes. And when I first saw this, I was kind of hoping that they were hinting at Alucard going into a darker direction, maybe that of his father. Maybe he would be the next Dracula. But Season 4 quickly undoes this tease and doesn't take it anywhere. With the Trevor Sypha storyline, I really like the town conspiracy stuff and the lore expansion of the Infinite Corridor, which is pretty cool. It's basically a realm that allows you to access an infinite amount of dimensions, including that which lies beyond death. It's really cool stuff altogether, but as a full season, I still felt like it was the weakest for me. Season 4, which ended up being the final season, is also a mixed bag for me, but I do think it's better than Season 3. Carmilla takes a much larger step for her goals of world enslavement, and Hector seems to have found some contentment within his role of creating monsters, though he also subtly plots ways out of the situation, which turns out to be pretty interesting. Isaac has the biggest pendulum shift here in this season. Between the last one and here, he decides to relinquish his goals of humanity's destruction and instead decides to stop Carmilla's plans. And in probably one of the coolest fight scenes of the series, Isaac versus Carmilla, it reminds me of something out of Devil May Cry, where the action and atmosphere is just so stylized and we have incredible choreography. There's a floor filled with blood, it's in some big chamber, you also have Isaac's demons helping him out. It's really great stuff. Castlevania is one of those animated shows that sometimes it feels like it's on a super low budget, but then there will be one scene or one fight scene that you can tell all the money went into. Well, this is one of those scenes. Another scene that people will kill me if I don't mention it is this one, although I have mixed thoughts on it. A vampire that was on Carmilla's side named Striga wears this special armor that allows her to operate in the daylight with a gigantic sword and lays waste to a bunch of enemies. The entire sequence is basically a straight-up Berserk reference to Guts wearing the Berserker armor and fighting a bunch of demons. And the scene is cool as shit. It's fucking great. My only gripe is that when I first saw clips of this scene, I was hoping that this would be a new character or a new antagonist or something that we would see multiple times. Striga is an alright character, but she doesn't really do much at all in the series in terms of story or character progression. So giving this immensely cool scene to a supporting character that never really does anything like this before or after lessened its impact for me, other than just its pure visual flair, which is great. The other thing here is still the lack of Dracula. In both Season 3 and 4, there are talks and story points about resurrecting him from various characters, but if you're expecting Dracula as a main character again, you're out of luck. Now, I will say Dracula is in Season 4 as part of the story, but he's nowhere near the forefront. On the flip side of that, who winds up being the final antagonist of the series is pretty cool. It's motherfucking Death, the embodiment of death itself, in the form of a giant, super powerful Grim Reaper-looking motherfucker. He's also voice acted by Malcolm McDowell, Alex from A Clockwork Orange. That is fantastic. And in just pure horror dark fantasy mythos, this final battle of the show is pretty damn fantastic. And though there are thematic elements here, like Trevor always being so close to death and him embracing his family's legacy, this fight still lacks the intimacy that Alucard vs. Dracula had in Season 2, but in terms of just pure epicness, it's a great way to end the show. Though I respect the show's ambitious nature and its journey to forge its own identity, I do think leaving Dracula largely out of the series after Season 2 was a mistake. Seasons 3 and 4 definitely have a lot to offer, and there's plenty to enjoy about them, but for me, it was never quite able to hit the peaks that Season 2 had, and there's a huge missing puzzle piece as to why that was. However, having said that, I do respect how the series went to approach the show once it came to its character building, which is what Season 3 primarily focuses on. They could have just had this mindless, bloody action all the time, but instead they decided to put in real effort to try to flesh the characters out and tell different stories, and I highly respect that. Castlevania took some premises from the classic video games and expanded it into a fully functioning dark fantasy world that blends great character work, hyper-stylized violence and action, sexuality, humor, and themes of humanity's fear of the unknown and its potential for growth, as well as what grief and isolation can do to somebody and the mistakes that we make in retaliation to that pain. It may not have the greatest consistency from start to finish, but there is plenty to enjoy here, and it very well may be one of, if not the, best video game adaptation of all time. Now, I know there is a spin-off series recently called Nocturne, but I have not seen that. From what I hear, most people don't like it. I don't know why. But why make a spin-off like this and not do Simon's Quest? Where's Simon Belmont in animation? Come on now, I'm still waiting for that. But until then, I can always enjoy the adventures and struggles of Trevor Belmont. So if you guys are fans of Castlevania, what are your opinions on the series? Tell me your favorite season, favorite moment, favorite characters. Let's discuss it down below in the comments. Anyways, as always, guys, I really appreciate you guys watching this video. Please give it a thumbs up and a comment to help it out in the algorithm. Let me know what you think about the series down below. Also, check the description to support Dr. Quinn down below, and there you'll also find all the various social media links where you can follow me, as well as my Patreon and channel memberships or whatever you feel like doing. Other than that, guys, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll talk to you next time.
Outside, living real life. Touch grass, go outside, living real life. Touch grass, go outside, living real life. Bitch, I'm real life, ride, living real life.